It was supposed to be a routine patrol, just another day for the U.S. Coast Guard off the coast of Florida. The sun was high, the sky a clear blue, and the water shimmered under the light. I was heading back to my boat after a long week at a conference when I saw them, 2 Coast Guard vessels closing in on my position. I figured they were just doing their usual checks. No big deal. But as they pulled alongside, the tension in the air was palpable. They weren't the usual officers I'd seen around here. These men were serious, their eyes scanning the boat with a meticulousness that felt off. One of them, a tall man with a buzz cut, signaled me to stop. I throttled down and turned to face him, my gut telling me something wasn't right. I tried to brush off the unease. Maybe it was just an overreaction. They hadn't stopped me in years, not since my last inspection, but they were still clearly on edge. "Sir, we need to conduct a search," he called out. His voice was firm, but there was something underneath it, a hint of impatience or something else that didn't sit right with me. I nodded, about to comply when another officer, this one shorter, with sandy hair, asked, "You're the only one on board?" I didn't know why the question struck me as odd. I had the paperwork for the boat right here in my back pocket. Still, I gave him a nod. "Yeah. Just me today." He stepped closer, his eyes lingering over me, sizing me up. "Step off the boat, please. We'll need to talk to you." The request didn't sound like a request. I complied, stepping out cautiously. My mind started racing. What exactly were they looking for? I had no drugs, no weapons, just my boat and a quiet day at sea. Then, just as they started to inspect the boat, I noticed the Coast Guard's captain approaching. He was speaking into his radio, his face drawn tight with concentration. "Sir, we've got a situation here. The man we're detaining. He's Navy," one of the officers whispered into his ear. The captain stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes widened when he looked at me. For a split second, I could feel the change in the atmosphere, the tension snapping. The officers hesitated, exchanging glances as if the ground beneath them had shifted. The captain, now looking flustered, straightened his back and took a step forward. "Sir. We need to verify some things." "Go ahead," I said, my voice cool and collected. They didn't know who they were dealing with, but it seemed I wasn't about to let them figure it out yet. The captain's face was flushed, his discomfort clear as he fumbled with his radio. He spoke to someone back at base, his words quick and urgent. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could feel the weight of it. The officers who had been so confident only moments ago were now visibly on edge. I stood there, my arms crossed, watching them. They were clearly out of their depth now. I kept my expression neutral, but inside, I could feel the familiar knot of anxiety creeping in. Why had this gone from a simple check to something else entirely? The captain turned to me, his gaze now softer, almost apologetic. "I'm sorry, sir. We've received some conflicting information. Please allow us a moment to clear things up." Conflicting information? I knew what was going on. They'd seen a black man on a boat, and assumptions had been made. Maybe they thought I wasn't who I appeared to be, just some guy out for a leisurely ride. But that couldn't be further from the truth. "Take your time," I said, my voice calm. I had all the time in the world. The last thing I was going to do was lose my composure, not with this crew. The officers continued their search, but it was obvious that they were now being extra careful, as if they were waiting for something to pop up. I had already seen their type before. They'd seen a black man in a boat, and they thought they could push me around. As I stood there, I heard the captain speak again, this time into his radio with a bit more authority. "Sir, I need confirmation on the man's credentials. Navy Admiral. Are you sure?" He paused, listening intently. The change in his voice was clear, he was no longer just going through the motions. The radio crackled again, but this time, the captain's face went pale. His hand shook slightly as he lowered the radio. "Sir," he began, his voice low. "We've made a serious mistake." I could hear the apology in his words, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to accept it. I'd been in enough situations like this before. Men like these didn't take kindly to being corrected, especially when they had already assumed they were in the right. But it wasn't about what I was willing to accept. It was about who I was, and who they thought I was. The captain cleared his throat, visibly struggling with his next words. He glanced at his officers, who now stood awkwardly around the boat, looking unsure of themselves. The atmosphere had shifted from confrontational to tense and uncomfortable. I don't know how this happened, sir," the captain said, his voice shaky. "The information we had said you were," he stopped himself, catching his breath. "I need to ask for your identification, sir. Please. I'll make sure this gets straightened out right away." I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I simply pulled out my wallet and handed him the military ID I kept tucked away. It was a standard habit of mine, especially when dealing with anyone in uniform. The captain hesitated before reaching for it, almost as if he was unsure of the implications of what he was about to read. He took the card from me with a stiff hand, and his eyes scanned it quickly, his frown deepening as he processed the information. The silence that followed was heavy. The radio in the captain's hand crackled again, but he didn't respond immediately. He was still reading, his mind catching up with what he'd just seen. "That's Navy Admiral?" he asked, voice faltering, almost as if the words tasted foreign in his mouth. I nodded slowly. "Yes. Navy Admiral. I've been serving for 23 years. The officers behind him exchanged uneasy glances. The short, sandy-haired one who had asked if I was alone seemed to shrink slightly under the weight of the realization. His face turned pale, and I could tell that the reality of the situation was dawning on him. The captain's face reddened as he realized his mistake. "Sir, he paused, looking helpless, trying to find the right words. "We were just doing our job. But I can't deny that we were wrong." I stared at him for a moment, the frustration bubbling beneath the surface. This wasn't the first time I'd been treated like this, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. But I had to let it go for now. I had bigger things on my mind. "I'm not interested in your apology," I said flatly. "I just want to know why you stopped me in the first place. What was it that made you think you had the right to search my boat and detain me?" I wasn't being rude, just direct. I needed answers. The captain shifted uncomfortably, but he couldn't avoid the question. We received a report," he muttered. "Something about suspicious activity in the area. But it was never linked to your boat." He seemed to be grasping for a way out of the situation. "Suspicious activity?" I repeated, a hint of disbelief in my voice. "You stopped me for a report, but didn't even have the decency to verify the details." The captain's head hung lower now. "We misidentified you, sir. I understand that's no excuse." I didn't need him to say more. I'd heard enough. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I took a deep breath, my jaw tightening as I tried to keep my composure. The sun was high above, and the sound of the waves slapping against the sides of the boat only seemed to make the tension more unbearable. "You don't understand," I said slowly, my voice steady but with an edge. "This isn't just about a mistake. This is about how you treat people. How you make assumptions based on the color of someone's skin, based on how you think they fit into a narrative you've created. I've had enough of this kind of treatment." The captain's face shifted from embarrassment to guilt, and I could see the weight of his regret. He didn't want to hear this, he didn't want to admit how deeply ingrained the prejudice was in the very system he worked for. But it needed to be said. "I've been through this my entire career," I continued. "I've seen it all. People thinking they know who I am just because of how I look, how I carry myself. But none of that matters when you're out here, and you decide that because I'm black, I must be doing something wrong." The captain nodded silently, taking in my words. He was trying to find an excuse, some way to justify what had happened. But there was none. It was plain and simple, they'd seen someone who didn't fit their idea of who should be on the water, and they'd acted on it without question. "I'm sorry," the captain finally said. "You're right. We didn't give you the respect you deserve. And for that, I'll personally ensure that you are not inconvenienced further." I wasn't sure if I was supposed to feel better by his apology, but I wasn't here for apologies. I was here for change. I needed him to understand the gravity of what had just happened. "You're going to do more than that," I said, my voice growing firm. "You're going to report this. You're going to make sure that no one else gets treated like this. You'll tell your superiors that this is not acceptable. This isn't just about my boat. It's about the message you're sending when you take someone like me and assume I'm a threat." The captain's eyes met mine, and I could tell he was listening now. "I will. You have my word." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Good. Now, get your men off my boat. I'm done here." The captain gave a quick nod and signal to his officers, who began to back away, their postures still tense but noticeably less aggressive. As they climbed back into their boats, I watched them go, feeling the weight of the situation linger. It wasn't over. It never was. But for now, they knew who I was. As the Coast Guard vessels drifted away, I stood there on my boat, watching them in silence. The water was calm again, the sunlight sparkling across the surface. But the sting of the encounter lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling of having been judged, of having been reduced to a stereotype before they even bothered to find out who I really was. I started the engine, the hum of the motor breaking the stillness. As I navigated my boat back out into open water, I couldn't help but think about how many others had been through the same thing. How many people, not just black men, had been stopped, questioned, or worse, simply because someone made an assumption about them. I wasn't naive enough to think one encounter would change the system. But maybe, just maybe, it would make them think twice before jumping to conclusions. Maybe they would realize that the world doesn't fit into the narrow box they tried to shove everyone into. As I cruised out toward the horizon, the weight of the day finally started to lift. But I knew that, in this line of work, it wasn't the last time I'd have to face ignorance, or fear, or even hatred. That's the reality when you've spent decades serving in the military, when you've worked your way to the top only to find yourself in situations like this. But that didn't mean I was going to back down. That didn't mean I would stop speaking up when it mattered. If anything, it made me more resolute. I wasn't going to let them define me. Not now, not ever. I looked over at the open water, the vastness ahead of me. I wasn't just any man on this boat. I was an admiral, a leader. And I'd earned that right, no one could take it away from me. This wasn't just a story about one bad encounter. It was about the work we all still had ahead of us, the work of dismantling assumptions and bias wherever they existed, one conversation at a time. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I did know this: I wouldn't let anything or anyone stop me from being who I was. And I was proud of that.